Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Maggie, and if you're new here, I just completed the first year of my Master of International Business program at the Shanghai Jiao Tong University. I've gotten a handful of questions from people who are either interested in the program or who have committed for this fall, so I figured I'd go ahead and share some of the tips and tricks that I wish I knew when I first started before I honestly forget what they all are, and hopefully this video will help you out in some way. So with that being said, this video will not really be about the pros and cons of the program. If you'd really like to hear more about that, I'd encourage you to go read this blog post that I made. But rather, this is more for those that have already committed to understand the expectations, course load, textbooks, housing, registration, things like that you'll end up facing this fall. So if all of that sounds good to you, go ahead and stick around and let's get started. So the very first tip I can give you is to make sure that you get the MIB guidebook. This is a completely different document than the International Student Guidebook that you'll get from the university. Rather, it's a document that was put together by the MIB program administration that's about maybe 20 to 30 pages that walks through your course load, your expectations, your requirements, things around the seminar, your thesis, like all of the things that you could possibly need. And so if you're having questions and they have not sent you that guidebook, I'd encourage you to either check the WeChat group that they would have made for your cohort and ask for it, or check your email because they might have sent it through that. And if they didn't do either and forgot to send it to you like they did us, definitely go ahead and message and say like, hey, I heard the previous cohort had this document. Do you have an updated version for us? Because we were all so confused when they kept saying like, check the guidebook. And we're like, this information is not in here. And we have read it cover to cover only to find out that they had worked so hard on this document and forgot to send it out. So definitely make sure you have that. I would like to provide a little bit of context about my background too, because it's definitely influencing the way that I perceived this program. So my undergrad was in graphic communications and marketing, and both of those majors required a broad range of knowledge. And so I've taken courses from business law, international business, management, marketing, data analytics, finance, accounting, micro and macroeconomics, public speaking. Like I have done a very broad range of classes in my undergrad experience. And then I also worked for 4 years for a multinational corporation before I decided to go back and pursue my master's degrees. Keep that in mind when I am providing feedback about different courses or the program as a whole, because I do really think that this program is geared more towards people that don't have that business background. And so for me, a lot of things might be redundant, but it might be really good knowledge for you if you don't have that same background. So just take everything I say with a grain of salt and definitely get opinions from multiple people. So one of the questions I was asked was how helpful the professors are if you don't have some of that foundational knowledge. And based on what I've heard from friends, it really depends on the professor if they'll provide you additional resources or textbooks that you can use to catch up. And for that reason, I'd really encourage you to get to know your classmates really super early on, because honestly, it's a really small cohort and your classmates are going to be the ones that you're turning to for help and advice more so than I think really the professors. So go ahead and start reaching out to them. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Ask if they want to go get dinner or grab lunch or go to the canteen together, because you're all in the same boat and most of you probably have similar questions. So there's no shame in asking for help when you need it. So when it comes to the actual course load and the way that classes are structured, the majority of them really relied more on the lecture and PowerPoints that they created to share information. A handful of classes required either readings from textbooks, case studies, or some additional outside books, in which case sometimes the professors would provide it, or you could find a classmate that creates a Google Drive and shares the files that they find online. Not saying that's what you should do, but you know, there are ways to get around not having to pay for the documents if you know the right people. I think one of the biggest questions everyone has when it comes to any program is like, which classes should I take and which ones should I avoid? I'm not going to share necessarily classes that you should take because I didn't necessarily find ones that I was like, oh my God, that was so great. Like I'd tell anyone who does this program to take it. I have a lot of business background, so I think a lot of the content was rudimentary or repetitive for me at least, but there are some classes that I'd recommend skipping or avoiding if you can, and these are ones that were told to me by the previous cohort to avoid, and so I'm going to share that knowledge with you, but obviously take it with a grain of salt. Maybe reach out to a few of my classmates and see if they took the class and if they would recommend it or not. So the first class would be cross-cultural management. And for me, the only reason that I'd really avoid this one is because a lot of the concepts that you learn in your general management class that you're required to take no matter what is covered. And so the content's kind of repetitive. If you don't mind that and you want a relatively easy time taking another course that really covered the same things, then you can do cross-cultural management. But I didn't necessarily hear like super positive or super negative things about this course, but that was one that was recommended to avoid based on, I think, the workload. Consider maybe other classes to get a little bit more value out of your education. The second class that I'd also avoid is e-commerce, which is honestly really sad because just the name of the class sounds so interesting, especially with China having such a different e-commerce landscape compared to the West. But the professor and the way that the content is taught, I hear, is honestly very difficult. And whenever I heard classmates complaining, it was usually about this class. For that reason, I'd recommend exploring other ways to find that knowledge rather than relying on this class specifically to gain that. And then the final recommendation to avoid would be the business consulting class, which again is another class that sounds like it should be really fun working for a Chinese company and doing case studies, but I think it could possibly be the same professor that teaches the e-commerce class. I'm not entirely sure, but I do know I heard a lot of complaints about this class too, based on the workload and the way that he teaches the content. So all of this is hearsay. If something still really interests you, go for it. But I'd really recommend maybe avoiding those 3 classes and seeing if there's alternatives. And if there's not, all the power to you. Choose what you want. That said, everything I've said is hearsay, so it's just based on things that I've heard, since I can't obviously give you a firsthand account of my experience since I didn't take those classes. So if you really are interested in these classes, maybe reach out to some of the previous students and see if they took it and what they thought about it. But otherwise, you can probably find other classes that might provide more value and more entertainment. The next topic I wanted to cover is your thesis. And as a double degree student, my timeline was a little bit more accelerated than my classmates. But that being said, we all struggled with similar challenges when it comes to the thesis and supervisors. Depending on how your MIB interview went, you may have already come up or had a discussion about what you wanted your thesis topic to be. If you haven't already decided, I'd really encourage you to start thinking about it before you arrive in September. The reason I say this is because the first thing that you'll end up having to do is finding a supervisor that can support you throughout the whole project. The list of supervisors is relatively short. Not all professors can be supervisors, not all professors can speak English, and you're also going to be competing with other master's students who are wanting these professors as their supervisors as well. I would encourage you to ask for the supervisor list early on in the semester. The program advisor should usually have access to that and can share the list that has the supervisor's name, their topic, and their contact information. And I would go ahead and send them an email saying, hey, this is the topic and methodology I think I want to do, and here's my resume and how I can contribute to your own research. Would you be willing to supervise this thesis? And the reason I say to start so early is because I had friends who reached out to 7+ supervisors who all said no or didn't respond because they already had students that they were committed to. So at a certain point, the challenge is not finding a supervisor that matches the topic that you want, it's just finding a supervisor in general. So for that reason, I'd really encourage you to reach out early, follow up, and if you're struggling, to reach out to the admin of your program and say hey, this is some of the challenges I'm running into. Is there anything that you can do to help? Because that is something that we ended up having to do. The other thing when it comes to your thesis is to make sure you're staying on top of deadlines. Sometimes the administration doesn't share those deadlines until they're creeping up, like next week. And so you don't want to be stuck in a position where you're doing a lot of work overnight because either they drop the ball or you drop the ball. So again, I would be very proactive when it comes to asking for deadlines and expectations because the administration is not necessarily the best at communicating that. I think the next biggest headache that we all had was around registration, and it was mainly more because of miscommunication than anything else. So around the time of orientation, there was a day where I got to meet all of my cohort for the first time, and I thought that that meeting was supposed to be going over our class requirements, the schedule, and having someone look at the schedule that we had created so that we can go ahead and register for classes. That ended up not being the case, and so I'd really encourage you to go through that MIB guidebook and make sure you know exactly what classes you need to take and which ones you want to take. The thing is, you are required to put together a study guide that includes both your fall and your spring semester classes. Whatever you select in the fall, imagine that you are locked in for the entire year based on whatever you select. So it's really important that you think critically about what classes really interest you and which ones you want to take, because the only changes that they may make towards your study plan is if there's classes that you wanted to take that conflict with each other in terms of timing, but not because, oh, I'm not interested in that anymore, or no, that class doesn't align with my schedule in terms of, I don't want to take classes on Friday. That doesn't matter. You're going to be required to take it no matter what, unless you have a truly valid excuse of this class is conflicting with this other class that I signed up for. So for that reason, be very intentional and deliberate with the classes that you choose for your study plan. The other thing I'd really pay attention to is that you're filling out the form fields correctly. So there's things like, does this count towards my GPA? Which semester do I want to do it in? And the reason I say that you want to make sure that you fill these out correctly, which honestly doesn't seem like fields that you should be able to manipulate, but whatever, is that if you say this class does not count towards my GPA, there's so many credits that you need to enroll in to count towards your GPA. And if you say like it doesn't count and you still take that class, it could delay your graduation by a semester or a year, because you can't start really on your thesis until you have completed all of your coursework. So it's really important that you double check that everything is correct based on their requirements. Have a friend check it, have a coordinator check it, and then have a friend, another friend double, triple check it, because you really don't want to have that headache of trying to get that fixed or figured out later down the road. So attention to detail there is really important. But once your study plan is submitted, registration is honestly not that big of a headache if you do it properly. Typically, the classes that are eligible based on your study plan show up in your registration, so you can just go ahead and click them and then click submit and you're registered. Just remember, when you are registering, you can't go and add additional classes that are outside your study plan. So anything on your study plan has to be registered for. You can't add or drop anything that does not equate to what you've put in that document ahead of time. I would also encourage that you register as soon as that window opens, because there have been situations where people are not able to get this specific class that they want because they waited. So the two biggest ones that I can think of is Chinese language and Chinese culture. Sometimes not all of the language levels are offered at the Xuhui campus, and so you may need to go over to the Minhang campus either by campus bus, which can be like 30 to 40 minutes, or by metro, which is closer to an hour and 15 minutes. And that back and forth can honestly suck depending on the rest of your schedule on that day. Another thing to consider is sometimes classes are offered either in English or Chinese, or at the Xuhui or Minhang campus. And if you wait to register and the English version and the Xuhui version are not available, the only alternative you have is to take the Chinese version or the Minhang campus version. And again, that commute is not the funnest thing to do in the world. And if you obviously don't speak Chinese, that is an issue. So I'd really encourage you just to register as soon as possible, so you get the English version on the Xuhui campus and the level that you want, just so you have an overall better registration experience. That's based on my opinion. Sometimes things get worked out, sometimes things don't. You really don't want to miss that class because they're not necessarily offered every semester. You might have to wait a full year before you're able to do that class again, and that would delay your graduation by a semester or a year. I think the previous cohort said that they didn't have any issues registering. Like, they thought, the majority of the classes that we were taking were just for MIB, and so you didn't have to register early. I think things might have changed between their year and our year, whether enrollment increased, our class was bigger, I'm not really sure, but I definitely know that our students were competing with exchange students as well as international MBA students for those slots. We definitely had an issue with the culture class in terms of how many seats were available, and they filled up really quickly. And I know that the IMBA students were warned by their professors, like, hey, it's going to fill up fast, so go and register ASAP. We were not given that same warning, and I don't think it's something that they've had issues with in the past. So just know going forward that I think demand for those classes are increasing, and so you want to make sure you get your seat at the time and location that you'd like it to be. That being said, if there are classes that maybe you're interested in but you don't know if you want to commit to them, I would encourage that you don't put it on your study plan and you just plan on auditing those classes. What I've been told for those classes is, the first 2 weeks of classes are usually for people to add and drop classes, depending on if you had it in your study plan. And you could go up to the professor and say, like, hey, I'm really interested in taking this class, but unfortunately I can't add it to my study plan, but would you be willing to let me audit the class? And sometimes you might need to fill out some paperwork, sometimes you might not need to. If anything, you still gain the knowledge even if it's not on your transcript, and you can probably add it to a resume or a cover letter later on if you really want credit for that class. that is something to consider as well. This next topic is about seminars. And so part of your requirements as a student is to take 10 seminars between the fall and spring semester. The official class will be registered under the spring semester, but that's because you will be submitting a document that has a review of the 10 seminars that you've attended, but you still need to be making effort towards attending those seminars in the fall semester. One thing that we did not know until essentially the end of our first year was that they only plan about 12 seminars that you can attend, and you are required to go to 10 of those. So if you did not go to some of those seminars that were offered in the fall semester, when it comes to springtime, you are SOL, essentially. I would highly encourage you to go to as many of the seminars that they offer in the fall semester so that when it comes to the spring semester towards the end, you can just choose not to go and either chill or go home early or, whatever. But not all of the events hosted by Anti qualify as a seminar. So make sure to check that WeChat group often. That's where the admin will tell you, like, this one counts as a seminar, this one doesn't, this is just an event we're promoting. And another alternative too is if you know people in Shanghai, if you're able to reach out to companies that will let you come and learn about them, or if they come and speak to your school, you can reach out to the program coordinator and say, hey, I have this opportunity. I'd love it to share it with the rest of the class. Would you consider offering this as an official seminar? And they'll say yes or no, depending on the qualifications. But that is a way that we were able to increase the number of seminars that we had as available. And some of those seminars honestly ended up being the most interesting ones of all of them offered. So I'd really encourage that you think outside the box and start looking at companies that maybe you're interested in and communicate that with the faculty early on in the fall semester. One thing also to note is that they do take attendance. So it's not something where you can just say like, oh, I've attended all of them and then write up about them based on other people's notes and then say like, you're good, because they did track who attended what events this past year. So it's not something that you can slide by necessarily. So housing. I was fortunate enough to get a single room in the Taoyuan dorm on campus. And honestly, it's relatively affordable, super convenient. The only downside I had was my room specifically had a lot of dust when I first arrived and it almost killed me, but that's a me issue and a story for another day. I will say registration is a little bit like Hunger Games in that all of the rooms filled up within 5 minutes. Single rooms are obviously high in demand, but there are double rooms where you share a bathroom with another individual. Your beds will be in the same room though. So it's not like you have your own private space, a bathroom connecting you and then another private space. No, like you guys are right next to each other when it comes to the different beds. For registration, I'd really encourage that you make your account a few days or a week ahead so that you know that you can log in and you don't have any issues there. I'd also really encourage that you know exactly which room you want so you can go ahead and go to that page, go to the room you want, and once registration hits that time, you just click, select it, and then just keep selecting things and accepting things, because honestly, you won't be able to understand what those legal terms are. Just go ahead and accept everything. Otherwise, your room is not going to be available. I would encourage you to look at rooms on the 3rd through the 5th floor, just because I heard for the 6th floor, the elevators take a really long time, and you might possibly have some bug issues if you're on the 1st or 2nd floor. But other than that, I think the majority of people had a decent experience in the dorms. I mean, it's like any other housing where you're going to have issues. So hopefully the odds are in your favor if you're able to get a room. So here are 2 apps that I'd recommend that you bookmark or download to help your life on campus a little bit easier. The first is this laundry room app. So the first time that you go to do your laundry in that room behind Taoyuan, go ahead and bookmark that app, because you can go back to it whenever if you're needing to check how many washers and how many dryers are available. This saved me so much time, so I didn't have to leave my room, go check if the washers are available, and then only to find out that they're all taken. And so when I told my friends, this was definitely a game changer for them as well, and I think it's definitely a very convenient app to have. The second app that I'd recommend downloading is this one. This is one that will tell you whenever your packages arrive. It'll show you the code and the storage location where it's held, and then also give you the code that you need to be able to check it out. I also really liked the physical app rather than just the mini app that's in Alipay, but it's up to you in terms of which one you'd like to bookmark and download for yourself. The last recommendation I have is to get used to the SJTU app. Besides the CUN code that you would use to be able to enter the campus or to be able to pay for food at the canteen, I also use this app a lot to refill my electricity, recharge my student card so that I had hot water, I use the campus map feature honestly quite a lot, especially whenever I went over to the Minhang campus to find where classrooms are, where the canteens are, where the visitor center is with the gift shop. So that's a great like sub app within that app that you can use. And then I also would reserve my bus seat between the Shuhei and Minhang campus and also use the bus map to see where the different stops are along those routes. The thing I probably use the most in the app is reserving the tennis courts, and that is something that happens every day at noon for a week ahead, and that is very cutthroat and goes within seconds. If you've ever wondered why, you can never see reservations at the tennis court available, it's because it happens every day at noon and it can go within a minute. So if that's something you really want, make sure to set an alarm so you remember, and I'd encourage you doing it from campus on the campus Wi-Fi. But if you have lasted this long, kudos. My throat is definitely a little sore and I definitely started rambling, so apologies. But I hope you found this a little bit helpful. And if you have any questions, go ahead and write them down below and I will answer as I see them. If you'd like to see more content, please provide suggestions in the comment box. Otherwise, if you're interested in anything SJTU, identity, China travels, go ahead and click subscribe because I'll definitely be posting more videos in the future. Thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next one.